Hey everyone, here's our second video about genetics. This one is all about Punnett squares, and you'll remember that Punnett squares are a tool that we use to show the possible genes that any two parents could give to their offspring. What you're going to do is you're going to see here, well, this is a yellow pea pod, and that's the phenotype. That's how it looks, but the genotype is little g, little g. And this pea is actually homozygous recessive. It has little g and little g. So we can put that parent's genotype up on the top of a Punnett square. Little g and little g are the two possible alleles that that parent could give. Over here, we see a big G and a little g, and we see that the phenotype of this pea plant is green. And green must be dominant because with a big G, we got green. So this parent is actually heterozygous. They have one big and one little g. And since they're heterozygous, they could possibly pass on a big G or they could possibly pass on a little g. So we just write the genotype of the two parents on the Punnett square, one parent up at the top and one parent down the side. Then you combine the letters from each parent. So this G and that G. So you get a big G and a little g, which is going to have a phenotype of green. Here you combine this little g with this big G, and you get a green phenotype again. These are both heterozygous individuals. And then down here, you combine this G with this G, you get a yellow pea plant. It is homozygous recessive. Yellow is the phenotype, little g is the genotype. And then here you've got little g, and you have little g, meaning it's homozygous. They are the same. It is recessive because it's the lowercase letter, and it is a phenotype of yellow. All right, let's look at some more examples. Let's imagine that you have a monohybrid cross. That just means that you're crossing two parents who are both heterozygous. The mother is big A, little a, she's heterozygous, and the father is big A, little a, he is also heterozygous. So here I've put the mother here. She could possibly pass on a big A or a little a, and you'll remember back that which one she passes to her offspring has to do with the law of segregation. So she's going to pass either a big A or a little a on. The dad is big A, little a, and he's also going to pass either a big A or a little a on to his offspring. So let's watch how that happens. So I'm going to start with this first box. The mother passes a big A and the father passes a big A to that offspring. That offspring would be big A, or homozygous dominant, and they would have the dominant trait. In this square, we have little a from the mom, we have big A from the dad, and this individual is big A, little a. They are heterozygous, and they would show the dominant trait. Down here, we have a big A from mom, a little a from dad, so big A from mom and little a from dad. This individual would be heterozygous, and that would be a dominant phenotype. And then finally, in our last little square, we get a little a from mom, we get a little a from dad. It's little a, it's homozygous because they're the same, but it is homozygous recessive. So this homozygous is recessive and this homozygous is dominant. Let's answer the questions. Are the parents heterozygous or homozygous? Well, look at the mother and look at the father. They have each a big A and a little a. Big A is different from little a. Both parents are heterozygous. What percent of the offspring, this shows the offspring down here, what percent of them would be heterozygous? Well, we have 4 total possible offspring types, and 2 of them would be heterozygous. So 2 out of 4 is 50%. What percent would be homozygous? Okay, homozygous dominant, homozygous recessive. That's 2 out of the 4 that would be homozygous, and that's 50%. All right, next up, what percentage of the offspring have the dominant phenotype? We talked a little bit about that here. So if it has at least one big A, it is dominant. So at least one big A, yes. At least one big A, yes. At least one big A, yes. At least one big A, no. So we have 1, 2, 3 out of the 4 that have the dominant phenotype because 3 out of the 4 have 1 or 2 big A's, and that is going to be 75%. What percent of the offspring have the recessive phenotype? Which ones would look recessive? Well, that's only going to be the little a, and that's 1 out of 4, so 25%. Finally, what percentage of the offspring are homozygous dominant? With homozygous dominant, we are only talking about these ones right here. Homozygous means they're both the same. Dominant means they're both big letters. So homozygous dominant is actually 1 out of 4. It's going to be 25%. Let's look at an actual trait. And this time you're going to have a purebred parent. So having brown eyes is dominant to having blue eyes. A purebred brown eyed woman has a child with a brown eyed man who carries the allele for blue eyes. Let's complete and set up a Punnett square. So first I'm thinking I'm going to use big B for brown eyes because that's dominant, and I'm going to use little b for blue eyes because that's recessive. Mom is going to be big B, because she's a purebred brown-eyed woman. She is a homozygous dominant brown-eyed woman. And dad, he's going to be big B, little b, because he's a brown-eyed man. He has brown eyes. That means he has to have at least one big B. But he carries the allele for blue eyes, which is little b. So I'm going to put the mom's genes that she could possibly pass down up here and the dad's over here. So mom has big B. So she could pass on a big B or she could pass on a big B. That's the only choice for her. Dad is big B, little b. He could pass on the big B or he could pass on the little b. Remember, that's the law of segregation that determines which one. So how will these cross? Well, in the first square, we've got big B from mom and big B from dad. In the second square, we have big B from mom, we have big B from dad. Down here, we have big B from mom, little b from dad. And over here, we have big B from mom and little b from dad. So will any of the offspring have blue eyes? The answer is no. And that is because to have blue eyes, which is the recessive trait, is going to have a homozygous recessive little b, and none of these offspring have little b. Is it possible the parents will have a blue-eyed grandchild? Well, maybe. There's actually a chance of their children, these two children in particular, carrying the blue-eyed allele, the little b, and they could pass that on to a grandchild, especially if they have children. If these kids, these big B, little b kids, would have a child with somebody who has blue eyes or with somebody who carries the blue eye trait. So these brown-eyed parents could actually have a blue-eyed grandchild, and it would be totally okay. All right, the next type of Punnett squares that I want to talk about are a little bit different. They have to do with sex-linked disorders. In this case, it's an X-linked. So it's a disorder that is carried on the X chromosome, and it is, in this case, going to be hemophilia. Hemophilia is a recessive X-linked disorder that mostly impacts males. Complete the Punnett square to the right. The mother's alleles are X with a big H. That means she does not have hemophilia because hemophilia is a recessive disorder. That means you would have to have a little h to have hemophilia. So the fact that she has a big H means that she is healthy. And she has X with a little h. That means she carries the trait of hemophilia, but she does not have hemophilia. So X big H means that her hemophilia gene, which is on the X chromosome, she actually has a healthy copy. And then X with a little h means that she also has a copy for having the hemophilia trait, but she does not have hemophilia because she has the big H. That saves her from having hemophilia. The man in this situation has X with a big H. He is healthy. He does not have hemophilia. And then he doesn't have another X chromosome. He has a Y chromosome because females have XX and males have XY. So when we cross this, we get an X with a big H from mom and an X with a big H from dad. For this possible child, we get X with a little h from mom and X with a big H from dad. So these two children that would have been possibly created are both females because they're both XX. This female does not have hemophilia. She is healthy because she has big H and big H. This female does not have hemophilia either. She has a big H, so she is healthy, but she is a carrier for hemophilia because she has a little h. All right, down here, this child has a big H, X with a big H from mom and a Y from dad. That means he is a boy. He is healthy because he has X with a big H, and he is a boy because he has a Y chromosome. And over here, we have X with a little h and a Y. This is a boy because he does have XY, and he has hemophilia because the only X chromosome that he has a little h on it, and that means that he would get hemophilia. So you can see, because of the way that these X-linked disorders are inherited from parents, is that most of the time girls won't have it, because if their dad was healthy, he would pass on that healthy chromosome and protect the girls from having it. But it is possible for a mom who is a carrier of a disease that is X-linked recessive to actually pass it on to about half of her sons, because she would give that son the disease chromosome, and the dad can't do anything. The Y chromosome doesn't have anything to do with hemophilia. So that Y chromosome is not able to protect this son from having hemophilia. All right, let's look at these questions. What percent of the offspring would be female? Well, these two are female because they're both XX. These two are male because they're both XY. So 50% are female and 50% are male. What percentage of the female offspring have hemophilia? We already said neither of these two girls would have hemophilia because they both have a healthy X chromosome from their father, so 0%. What percentage of the female offspring carry the allele for hemophilia? Well, this one doesn't. This girl has big H and big H with her X chromosomes, but this girl has X big H and X little h. That means she is a carrier of hemophilia and could possibly pass it on to her own offspring. So 50% of the females, out of these two females, 1 out of 2, so 50% of females could carry the allele. What percentage of the males actually have hemophilia? Okay, of the males, there are 2 males, XY, and one of them has hemophilia, the one with the lowercase h, because hemophilia is X-linked and recessive. So he does, that's 1 out of 2 males, that's 50% of the male children of this couple would likely have hemophilia. All right. Now, you might have heard of this or maybe seen it before, but it actually is possible for us to look at 2 traits at the same time. This would be called a dihybrid cross. And I'm not going to actually get super into this during this class, but I just want you to know that it exists. So if you wanted to look at 2 traits at the same time, you could on a really big Punnett square, and it's called a dihybrid cross. Next up, we're going to talk about patterns of inheritance, so stay tuned.